Blanket. Did you know that I like the Switch? Yeah, because I do. And somehow I get the feeling that if you're watching this, you might just think it's pretty alright too. I mean, it's a home console, it's a handheld, it's everything rolled up into one. It's got a ton of great games, it's becoming a port machine, it's just a super duper good awesome thing that I really like. But as the little thing ages, I do find myself wondering, what's next for Nintendo? They'll definitely give us something after the Switch. I don't think they'll pull a George Costanza and wait until they hit a high point and then just be like, we're out, see you later. We're making games for Steam now. But the Switch is such a good concept that I have to wonder where they'll go from here. Will they do the same thing again, but better? Will they try to put a new twist on the concept? Or will they pull another 180 and do something totally new? I don't know, but I do know one thing. Speculation and hypotheticals are tasty treats for Arlos. So let's put on our bibs, grab our forks, and talk about what the future might hold for Nintendo. One of the biggest questions we can ask ourselves is, will Nintendo continue to only support one major system at a time? And to this I say, while you can never count out any outcome for the most unpredictable game company in the world, going back to 2 seems really unlikely. If anything, there's the fact that soon before they brought us the Switch, they merged their home console and handheld divisions, which makes me feel like this was a permanent change for them. It feels like they're not planning on distinguishing between the 2 types of games anymore, and thus they're going to go with one singular system pretty much forever. But let's explore a few different possibilities here. They could always give us a new dedicated home console and start treating the Switch like the handheld, but the whole point of the Switch is that you can play Nintendo's best games wherever you want, so they're not going to start making even better games on their home console and leaving the Switch out in the cold. Why make a hybrid if later you're just going to demote it to the inferior handheld one? There's always the chance they'll release a cheaper version of the Switch itself that only connects to the TV, like an opposite version of the Switch Lite, but that's not really the same thing at all. That's just another revision type of thing. Slightly more realistic would be them introducing a new dedicated handheld system like a successor to the 3DS. The whole reason they supported the 3DS for as long as they did was because the tech was much simpler than the Switch's, so they were able to price it pretty low, which was of course perfect for a handheld system belonging to one person. It was very kid-friendly. You could buy one for each of the little tykes and not hurt your wallet nearly as bad. But now, with the Switch Lite, that market has been reached. It's handheld only, and it's a whole $100 cheaper than the regular Switch. $200 is still nothing to sneeze at, but that price is only going to go down over time, or at the very least, it will get more valuable bundles. So creating a new, lower-cost system would make positively no sense at this point. Nintendo toyed with the idea before the Switch launched because they wanted to leave their options open, but now that the Switch is a huge success, I'd bet hard money they're not going to give us a 4DS or whatever. And of course, no matter what kinds of systems you're talking about, it is a hard fact that having 2 systems would once again split Nintendo's development resources in half, drastically reducing the number of games they were able to produce for each one. This would of course harm both of them, and the combined development power is one of the reasons the Switch is performing better than, say, the Wii U. I've got some gripes with the overall pacing, but there's no doubt about it that the Switch will probably end its run with the most robust library of any Nintendo system ever. Yet another reason I don't think splitting their hardware up again is likely. The absolute most pressing question we can ask ourselves about Nintendo's future, though, is, even if they only support one major console at a time from here on out, will they stick to the hybrid model? Or is there a chance they'll ditch it in favor of something else? The latter also seems unlikely, or at the very least, it's not something that I want to see. I honestly think they've struck gold here, and the Switch itself might not be perfect, but the hybrid model is. Throughout Nintendo's tumultuous history of home consoles, their handhelds have always done just fine. Pokémon obviously has a lot to do with this, but I think people are also just very attracted to having a nice little portable system to play on the go. Mobile gaming has certainly cut into that handheld pie considerably, but the success of the 3DS and now the Switch prove that there will always be people looking for bigger, more complete handheld gaming experiences. Not to mention ones that aren't constantly reaching and grasping and grabbing for their wallets like zombies trying to get through a barely barred door. And with the Switch, it's the best of both worlds. People get that handheld action they so crave, but holy cow, now it's not just Pokemon and Tetris and 2D Mario. Now they get giant adventures and multiplayer plats and countless indies on the go. It's this perfect storm of awesomeness and convenience, and with a terrific lineup of full-fat, crowd-pleasing first-party games, Switches have been moving off shelves at an extremely healthy rate. I've said this before, probably a bunch of times, but one of the reasons the Switch works so well is because its gimmick isn't a gimmick. With the Wii and the Wii U, it was, we want to port this game right here, but what's the point if we can't utilize motion controls? We would love to bring this game over, but we can't think of a good use for the gamepad. Those were always pretty lame excuses, but a little more reasonable was, we want to put our game on the Wii, but we don't know how to map everything to that ridiculous controller with barely any buttons on it. We'd love to do a Wii U port, but if we don't do something with the gamepad, we're gonna look lazy, and we don't have time for all that. Whatever their reasons were, the weird controllers were a barrier for developers, and not to mention players as well. Plenty of people hated motion controls from the get-go. Some people despised splitting their attention between the TV and the gamepad. These controllers had their perks. Don't get me wrong, lots of fun stuff was done with them, but even at the best of times, they were divisive and they complicated the ecosystem a whole lot. Playing games on the go though? No gimmicks here. This only enhances what is otherwise a very normal gaming experience with normal buttons on a normal controller. There are no hurdles for developers and no hurdles for players. Except for when Nintendo shoehorns in forced motion controls, which significantly harm accessibility, but that's a discussion we're gonna have another day. Point is, the model is just perfect. And I really can't see why Nintendo would abandon it. From where I'm standing, it would be pure foolishness to attain relative perfection, then just leave it behind. So, since I'm so convinced that they should continue on with the Switch model and not release any additional systems outside of the Switch family, what is my perfect hypothetical Switch successor? Well, I'll tell ya. It's just another Switch. A Switch 2, if you will. It's the same thing, but more powerful. If the Switch is a little above 7th gen hardware in terms of graphical capabilities, the Switch 2 is closer to Gen 8. And then of course a higher resolution screen, more sharing options, better OS, Joy-Cons are revamped, they have a better build, they fit more comfortably on the system, higher quality components overall, maybe a new feature or two, even HRD rumble, I don't really know, but for the most part, just the same thing, but better. I will admit, however, that there are a few potential problems with this. Largely, it comes down to the marketing. Having a 2 next to the name Switch would certainly be a lot less confusing than having a U next to the name Wii. But whereas visually, PlayStations and Xboxes tend to look relatively distinct from generation to generation, how would the Switch 2 distinguish itself from the one? The Switch is a black, nondescript little screen with 2 Joy-Cons attached, which combined give us a very standard spread of sticks and buttons. It's very basic stuff, and I think that's one of the things that's so appealing about it, and any major distinguishing changes are going to start to look weird and affect functionality. And beyond that, new PlayStations and Xboxes tend to introduce a lot of new features. The PS3 and 360 gave us deep interfaces and online stores and ways to easily connect and play with friends. PS4 and Xbox One gave us a bevy of built-in recording and streaming options. PS5 and Xbox whatever have yet to be fully revealed as of this recording, but we know they're working on cloud services and lightning speed load times thanks to solid-state drives. So between the graphical jump, the major new features, and even the visually distinct hardware itself, it always feels like a new PlayStation or Xbox is a big deal. Less of a deal than it used to be when consoles were still relatively young, but a decently big deal nonetheless. There's always the chance that Nintendo will start bringing in all those other new features their competitors have been utilizing, like a more robust online experience or more sharing features, that kind of stuff. But seeing as this is Nintendo, I'm gonna remain a little doubtful on that front. They're like me in a cold pool. They dip their toe in, then agonize over the process of slowly submerging themselves, even when they see how everyone else in the pool is already having a great time swimming without them. And if the Switch 2 looks mostly the same, and it doesn't have a lot of big new OS features and unique selling points and whatnot, and all it's got going for it is better graphics, it might not make as big of a splash in the market. Personally, I'm not necessarily sure if this would be a major problem. If they've got 100 million Switch owners by the end of the thing's life, there is a fine chance that they'll all just want the next Switch because that's how they get to keep playing Switch games. But I'm trying to look at it from Nintendo's perspective. Can you see them just sort of doing the same thing again and hoping people will buy it? Nintendo's all about wow factor. They're all about that gimmicky little hook. Even if it's called the Switch 2, I can't imagine them trying to sell it without that hook. And honestly, I'm having a really hard time thinking of some kind of major new feature they could add without compromising the elegant simplicity of the Switch. Being basic in a lot of areas is what makes it so good. It's what makes it so accessible and functional and comfortable. It's why third parties are flocking to it, and gamers with more traditional tastes are making it their first Nintendo system in ages or ever. This may sound really pessimistic. I should be confident in Nintendo's ability to surprise and delight and maybe even innovate with their hardware. But I feel like the best case scenario is they give us the Switch 2 with some silly gimmick that makes them feel confident in marketing it and scratches their strange itch to do something weird and new, yet is benign enough that it doesn't really hurt anything. Like the 3D on the 3DS. It was Nintendo's way of distinguishing the thing from its predecessor. They got all silly with the marketing and the early games. They got to have their fun, and in the end, it didn't hurt the system's price or accessibility. After they lowered the price, it was perfectly affordable despite the 3D, and for the most part, people bought it not because of the 3D, but simply because they liked the games on it. So if Nintendo gives us the Switch 2, now with Smell-O-Vision, but it's still only $300 at launch, and they also give us a nice little slider to turn the smells down or off if we so choose, then maybe we'll be okay. If they do something drastic on the other hand, what kind of drastic thing, you may ask? Well, how about a new controller? So far, one of the only sources of information possibly about a theoretical follow-up to the Switch comes from a shareholders meeting in July of 2019. When asked whether the practice of holding a controller in your hands and looking at a screen would continue to be the standard, Miyamoto mentioned how Nintendo helped pioneer much of what has now become standard for game controllers, namely the D-pad and the control stick. He then went on to say the following: "I also believe that we should quickly graduate from the current controller, and we are attempting all kinds of things. Our objective is to achieve an interface that surpasses the current controller, where what the player does is directly reflected on the screen and the user can clearly feel the result. This has not been achieved yet. We have tried all kinds of motion controllers, but none seem to work for all people. As the company that knows the most about controllers, we have been striving to create a controller that can be used with ease and that will become the standard for the next generation." Basically, Nintendo is looking into drastically changing how controllers work. And I must admit, it is a little unsettling. Like I said before, changing controllers is how they've hurt themselves in the past. Sure, the Wii sold great, the idea worked for a time, but it also had a ton of issues when it came to its motion controls, and people have grown less and less receptive to waggle over the years. And of course, the Wii U gamepad was supposed to be an innovation, but ended up being a major dud. Trying to improve upon perfection and move away from the basic controller setup with the Switch is a dangerous idea. They could think they've created the next great controller that will become the new standard across the whole industry and just be wrong. Clearly, they've been wrong before. Or they could by some crazy chance do it and come up with something that's just plain better than a regular controller, and no one wants to adapt their games to fit it, so they create a rift between themselves and third parties anyway. The whole thing is just worrisome, and it feels a little like wanting to fix something that ain't broken. And I keep trying to come up with even the teeniest, tiniest thread of an idea for what they could do to make a control scheme that's better than sticks and buttons, and I can't. Every time I think I'm onto something, I think about it a little more, and it just doesn't work for everybody in every situation. I mean, there's plenty of stuff you could do, motion tracking, some sort of touchpad with haptic feedback, something along those lines. I mean, Miyamoto specifically said where what the player does is directly reflected on the screen and the user can clearly feel the result. But beyond some sort of full Star Trek holodeck kind of thing, I don't know what that would be. Anything other than a solid stick that you can feel and you always know exactly how far it's tilted will come with big disadvantages. That's the problem with a lot of motion controls. They offer perks when done right, but without physical feedback, it's hard to keep your bearing and easy to overshoot in any direction. The accuracy just isn't there in a lot of cases, and of course the whole thing isn't always conducive to the comfort of holding a controller or, of course, an entire system in your hands, unless you're just using the gyro to aim or something. While Miyamoto's words were a smidge scary, there were a lot of tidbits in there that do ease my worry. In his quote, he admitted that so far, no motion controllers work for all people. If you ask me, this is huge. It means that accessibility and across-the-board comfort is important when searching for this new design, and that's quite a relief. He also admitted that the basic system of sticks and buttons and looking at a screen is currently the clear winner. This is also huge. Before, he seemed to value controller quote-unquote innovation over basically everything else. If it can be done by waggling a controller, give it motion controls. Doesn't matter if it's less fun. People don't really like the gamepad? Nonsense. We just need to make more games where it's absolutely required. But him basically saying, yeah, sticks are just the best right now. They're the most accurate and reliable, is to communicate that his desire to innovate might not be clouding his judgment as much as some people might have assumed. Furthermore, in his quote, he mentioned that they still haven't found what they're looking for in this regard, and hardware head Ko Shioda backed him up, saying how they are still looking, and most of what they come up with in the lab won't even see the light of day. So we know they're not just coming up with any old wacky new thing and pushing it out there. It seems like they're actually trying really hard to come up with a new way to control a game character that works for everyone and is actually better than a regular stick and buttons. And hey, if they're being reasonable about it and they don't choose to move on a design unless they really think they've got it, maybe the Switch 2 won't see any major controller changes at all. Maybe this is just sort of an ongoing R&D thing, and soon they'll be ready to start developing the Switch 2 and they'll be like, well, I guess we didn't reinvent the controller this time. Maybe next time. But then, of course, that does kind of force us to circle back around again and think, if Nintendo doesn't try some weird new controller, what will they do? What will make the Switch 2 different from the Switch 1 besides better graphics and maybe a couple of extra features? I really don't know. I wish I could come up with more fun ideas and elaborate more on all the possibilities, but I can't. What they've got right now is so perfect that doing it again, but better, would be the best option. But it's Nintendo, and I have to doubt that they would want to do something so simple. Would doing a Switch 2 be the safe option because you're just giving your customers what you already know they want? Or would not having a strong new identity hurt the Switch 2? It feels like this very strange conundrum. And if you want to really complicate matters, let's think about Nintendo's systems beyond the Switch 2. If it's hard enough to make a Switch 2 and somehow give it its own unique identity, imagine the Switch 3, or 4, or 5. Will Nintendo stick to the hybrid thing forever? We don't know where gaming will be decades from now, but at the same time, even with advancements in VR and all that, I don't know if I can see the traditional holding a controller and looking at a screen thing ever going away entirely. It's the simplest, it's the easiest, it's the most comfortable. And if that does stick around basically forever, then I really do think that the Switch's hybrid concept should stick around forever as well. You're not going to come up with an idea that's better than switching between TV and handheld play. Those are the two ways we play games. They could make future Switch models more foldable and compact or something to make the handheld experience that much better, but that's about it. We don't really need anything else. So if I think they should use the hybrid model forever, I must also come to the conclusion that they really should just make the Switch 2, forget the flashy gimmicks, and just focus on giving us better hardware and more features and stuff. Because even if they're able to pull out one more silly thing for the Switch 2 so they can hinge all their marketing on it, what's their long game? Will they be able to do it again for the Switch 3, and 4, and 5, etc.? It feels like scaling back the wacky stuff and just giving us the same basic concept, but with improvements each time, is the only logical way to go. The alternative is just too convoluted and difficult. Change just for the sake of change is rarely a good thing, and it will start to wear on their customers. And if they become more willing to give us great new, non-wacky features without agonizingly lowering themselves into the pool, they can iterate every generation the same way PlayStation and Xbox does. If they're in it for the long haul, they might not be able to rely on the whole surprise lightning in a bottle thing anymore. And I know Nintendo ditching the wacky hardware angle sounds like a big fat impossibility. Creating new hardware and having software that utilizes it in some special way has become their thing over the last few generations. But I probably don't have to convince you that 1-2 Switch and Labo can't even hold a candle to Nintendo's other big releases in terms of sales success, overall importance, and even cultural impact, despite their innovation. And you very likely agree with me when I say that forcing people to play Pokemon Let's Go with one hand and flick the Joy-Con to throw Pokeballs was a silly and frustrating move. The Switch isn't selling because of motion controls or HD rumble or the little IR sensor or any of that. The Switch is capturing people's interest not because it's so novel and you just gotta try it, but because it's just a really good product that makes playing games really easy. Leaving the silliness behind for the most part and simply improving on the hardware might be all they can realistically do without inhibiting their future success. But hey, the future of the whole motion control / casual angle is yet another bigger discussion for another day. I really don't know what's in store when it comes to the future of Nintendo's hardware, but let me tell you another thing I do know. I want to hear what you'd like to see down in the comments. Do you want a safe iteration on the Switch like I do? Do you want Nintendo to go full VR? Do you want them to split development between two systems again for reasons? Let me know, and you have What's going on? Whoa!
Arlo, I am the spirit of Switch. I appear before you bearing cosmic knowledge.
What knowledge?
All of your questions can be answered with one single word. One word and you shall understand all.
One word? Oh, what is it? Tell me!
Behold, Arlo, your future. The Switch's future. The future of video gaming as you know it.
Well, there you have it.